an all-new episode of the All Immigrant Podcast. I am your host, Abin. I am once again joined by my co-host, Vivek. Vivek, how are things, my
Hey,
friend?
it's good for 7 a.m. and it's getting a little cold. Chicago's getting a little bit cold now, but it's awesome, honestly.
I think Vivek and I are taking turns in doing early morning podcasts. The last one was me. I was up at 7 a.m. and this time it's him. So we're just trying to make this time difference
Well,
work.
at least I'm a morning person, right? So I wake up at 5:45 anyway, so that's helpful, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, fair, yeah. Compared to me, I am not a morning person, so the last one was a struggle for me. So at least I'm glad this somehow fit into your schedule. But okay,
Awesome. So
I think we should stop talking amongst ourselves and introduce our guest. What are
yes,
our manners? I would like to welcome to the episode Monica Millares. I apologize if I've got that wrong, but I tried my best. Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Uh, so Monica is a product leader in a financial well-being advocate and a passionate advocate for diversity in the financial sector. With over a decade of experience in the fintech industry, Monica has left an indelible mark on the industry. Monica's journey is nothing short of extraordinary. She began as a junior analyst with global giants like Visa and Barclaycard, and from there, she became one of the pioneering team members of the UK challenger Tandem Bank. Her role involved building a digital bank from scratch and collaborating with the CEO on strategic initiatives and board management. But Monica's story doesn't stop there. She played a pivotal part in launching and growing BigPay, which is now one of the largest neobanks in Southeast Asia, with a staggering 1.37 million users. Her work has spanned continents from the UK to Mexico and Asia, and she's established herself as a strong, empathetic, and resilient leader in every environment. Monica is not just a fintech professional, she's also a podcaster, hosting Purpose Driven Fintech, a podcast focused on building fintech companies the right way. She's also committed to mentoring the next generation of professionals in the industry. Today, we'll dive into Monica's remarkable journey as an immigrant and how it has influenced her work in the fintech space, her perspective on making fintech more human, and the lessons she's learned from her experiences in corporate and startup environments. Monica, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. The pleasure is mine. Thanks for such a good introduction.
wow, that's quite a remarkable journey thus far, Monica. It's pretty amazing. We have so many questions for you. So I'm just gonna kick it off, and let's build from there. Um,
That's it.
so, one of the things that we found on your story was that you made quite a major switch, right? So you took up a role in product and account management after you had your education in industrial engineering and management information systems. So this is quite a drastic pivot. So what are some of the circumstances that led to that pivot?
Well, if we put context, I studied in just industrial engineering back in Mexico. My first job was in a bank in Mexico. And the context, like the thing that triggered the pivot was I wanted to study my master's abroad, not in Mexico, but I wanted to go abroad and have that contact, that experience. So I did move to London. I went to LSE. I was always a good student, so I got all my distinction degrees and all that stuff. But then I guess like this is where going abroad for 1 year is fun and everyone wants to do it. But then when you make the decision to I want to stay, that's when you become a real immigrant, right? And the life of living on your own outside of your country, like the real life, not the student life, that's when it begins. And basically the pivot was I had just moved to the UK. Well, I finished my master's and I was like, I want to stay whatever it takes. It was want to stay whatever it takes. And this is 2008. So it was like in the middle of the financial crisis.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2008, 2009. I had a loan to pay for the masters, but even with everything, I was like, I want to stay in London because I wanted to move from being a student because I didn't have money when I went as a student. So, I always said there's three types of students: the wealthy students, the average students, and the students in a budget. I was a student in a budget. So I was like, I want to stay in London and experience London with a bit more money, not just a student in a budget and pasta and tuna all the time. So that kind of pushed me to be like, and I need to find a job. And that's where kind of I guess like the passion and resilience and determination kicked in because like given that we were in the middle of the crisis and I was a foreigner, it's just like application after application after application after application after application for months getting rejection after rejection, and then until one day you get a job. So it's not like I chose my next job, it
Yeah.
just was the job that I got in London, and I was like, yes, I
That,
got a
that
job.
That makes so much sense because I think as immigrants, you said the whatever it takes, right? That whatever it takes is something that I believe every immigrant has faced, because there are always those moments where you're stretched and you are trying to survive, and you just take whatever you find. And I think that that makes perfect sense. Even for someone like me who I didn't have the struggle of having to find a job because I moved as an immigrant with a job. But in my
Mm.
case as well, there were different challenges within my job that stretched me and asked me, hey, do you really want this? And it made me question, and then I said, okay, I have to, whatever it takes, I have to stay on, and I have to see the path that I chose, and I have to see it through. So I completely understand the whatever it takes is it's kind of like the slogan for every immigrant, right?
Yes, and I've never thought about it, but yeah, it's like whatever it takes. I even remember I finished uni. I did not have a job. I had money for the next 3 months. My auntie gave me like $1,000 extra so that I could stay, and I signed the rent contract with a friend. I was like, "Are you sure?" I'm like, "Yeah. If I don't figure it out, then I'm sure we'll find someone to replace me, and like we'll have someone to rent the room, right?" But yeah, I went to that degree of whatever it takes, just like a little bit of faith, sign the rent contract, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, those moments really show you how resilient you can be. Because much like, I mean, for you it was the 2008 crisis. For me, it is 2020. So I was in my final year of grad school, and in March, and I was going for I've said this story on the podcast several times, but I was going up to intern with the Zeiss group, and overnight they were like, okay, we're not going to, you can complete the internship, but we're not going to hire you because there's a hiring freeze. And that was the least of my concerns, I think, because there was suddenly this pandemic that came out of nowhere, and the main idea was trying to stay alive in a country where healthcare is so expensive. And it just there was so many different factors that came into play, like much like your rejection after rejection. Finally you're in a scenario where you can't be you can't it's a beggars can't be choosers kind of a situation, right? You land into your next job, and that's kind of what happened to me as well after so much struggle. And it's just one of those things where, like, okay, fine, let when you can't make your own path, let the path guide you.
Oh, I like that.
I should that's you know what, I would like to say I practiced that line. I just came up with it on the spot.
It's a good line. It's a good line.
Thank you.
It's a good thing to
uh
record it so you can remember what it is later, Abin.
yeah, for sure. uh but Monica, moving on, so your life has been characterized by so many geographical pivots, from Mexico to London, which you just spoke about, and then to Malaysia. Walk us through some of the key changes in those circumstances that led you to those moves. I mean, you spoke to us about London,
Yes,
but how did you move from London to Malaysia?
yes. So that one, I say, it was a little bit of luck. I was very well prepared, and I had the courage to say yes, because this is like fast forward 9 years later. I'm in the UK. Like I said, I always worked in financial services, but it was traditional financial services. Back in 2013, 14, the concept of what we call fintechs started coming up, right? So it's like new digital banks. We're going to disrupt the industry, banking is broken. And then I met an entrepreneur. And same, it's like kind of like we met, we interviewed, but it was just the right time where banking is broken. The Bank of England had only given one banking license in the past 100 years. We did not have a banking license. We did not even have a name. It was a concept. And this guy, Ricky Knox, who's an amazing entrepreneur, was like, yeah, but like we're building a bank from scratch. No one has ever done this in the past 100 years. Banking is broken. We need to do something about it. And basically, I jumped from Barclays, big corporate, stable job, to go and work in this startup. That's it. I was one of the very first joiners, which was amazing. So I get to learn a lot. And as part of that journey, then the startup also went through its ups and downs. And at some point, we had a fundraising crisis. During that time, I got a phone call. And it was, hey, this opportunity in Asia to start a new bank, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, 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 I'm very happy in the UK. And then a month later, same guy. Hey, remember I told you about this opportunity? I was like, yeah. I genuinely that time I answered by chance. You know, one of those times that you have an unknown number, but somehow you answered. And I did, and it was this guy, and he was like, "The founders are here. They really want to meet you. Why don't you go? There's nothing to lose. Just go for a coffee. Nothing to lose." And that's the phrase that caught me. I was like,
Wow.
"Well, actually, that's a good point. There's nothing to lose. Let's just go for a coffee." And that's it. Like after many interviews, this, the other, da, 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 I always say they brainwashed me. I brainwashed myself, and then here we go. I decided to leave the UK. Then I moved to Malaysia to start a new bank again. But the
Wow.
big difference was in the UK, I was kind of part of the junior team helping the founders. And I did learn a lot. I had a ton of exposure in the bank. And then when I moved here, I was moving as part of the leadership team. So it was different because it was very young leadership team still, but it was part of the leadership team, repeating what I had already done in the UK. So it was kind of a hashtag the Asian adventure, and I just went for it.
Wow.
That's
That's
the
amazing.
context. Yeah, it's good.
That's pretty amazing. That's pretty amazing. That's very bold, you know. So and I
Yeah,
think
it
that
was super bold.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that dovetails into the next thought I had, you know, very well. So you moved again, you know, three different countries, uh, and you were each time you were chasing something. When you moved to London, you were chasing a passion of yours where you wanted to live in the UK. When you moved here, you were chasing this amazing opportunity, and you wanted to see how that unraveled. But let's talk personally, right? How were these moves for you personally? Because you know you were leaving. I think in the first move you're leaving your family behind, moving to a place where you wanted to live in. You probably were really enjoying your life there, and then you left this behind and you moved to another country, which is, you know, in a completely different part of the world. So walk us through your journey personally, some of the challenges you face, as well as, you know, some of the things you felt as an immigrant that were different in these three countries.
Yeah, I think that's the most important question because no one really asks that slash focuses on that unless you're an immigrant. You know,
Yeah.
you know the reality. So when I moved to the UK, probably the first year was quote unquote easy because you go to uni, you have your friends. You know, it can be tough, but like you have your friends, and it's like yay, student life, and you party and you study. Even like I was very quote unquote nerd. But like you study, you party, whatever. But I was not a party girl, more like a study girl. But then the challenge goes started at the end of the program when we're in the middle of the crisis, and then all my friends left. Everyone left. Only like a handful of people, all the people I knew, we stayed and had a job. And then that's when reality hits because then you're like, oh, I'm on my own in London. I don't know anyone. It's dark. It's rainy. I did have an amazing job because, I mean, it was a job at Visa, right? In the UK. So it was a really good job. But at the same time, the culture shock was bigger because that's when I realized, like, I come from a Latin background. Like, I'm Mexican. I'm loud and I'm expressive and I'm like, I'm a hugger, you know? And when I was in the UK, I was more like, oh, you don't hug. Just like I hug when we say hi, I hug a stranger. But in the UK, it was more like, oh, cannot hug. Or even at work, like I felt like I had to be very serious and I couldn't be myself. And I felt caged. So shortly after I finished uni and I started working, I went through what I call the quarter of a life crisis. And that quarter of a life crisis, but was because of that, because I was on my own in a different country where I felt like I didn't really fit slash I couldn't be myself. So I went through a journey of personal discovery, personal everything to kind of go back to being me. And it took time, but then you get
Wow.
comfortable being yourself again.
So how is, like, I mean, I know this is not in the list of questions we'd ask, but like
It's okay.
when you moved to Southeast Asia, How different was that from you? Because you'd spent 9 years in the UK, and like again, you had to change again. What was that change like?
Okay, I'll summarize it very simple.
Hmm.
I cried for the first 3 months almost every single day. I
Oh
never
no.
swear. I never swear, but the first 3 months I swear every single day. And my family they laughed because I never swear. And then you have me on the phone. Oh, this is blah, 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 blah. And they were like, "Oh, you're so funny." It's like this is not funny. Blah, 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 blah. It was very difficult because then exactly when I moved to the UK, like I said, when you move as a student, you have a network and you're studying this the other. Here I was moving to different continent, different country. I didn't know anyone, different job. It was not the same company, different boss. Like everything was new. And what I always say is I underestimated the amount of change that I was going to go through because I did, and I overestimated my ability to make friends because I'm sociable most of the times. But this time it took me way longer, like way longer to adapt. So it was very, very, very difficult, especially the first 3 months. I've been here 6 years, right? So it's like you adapt. But even though you've been here 6 years or 9 years in the UK, it's never a smooth sailing like if you were at home because there's always
Yeah.
something you're away from home.
Yeah, I feel like the two kinds of challenges that immigrants face. One is adapting culturally to the country that they're living in, which you touched upon, and the second one is finding connects with people similar to them and finding themselves in a sense, right? Because you lose yourself a little bit when you are thrown into this new environment where you can't connect with people. You're constantly learning, and then you're also trying to figure out, hey, who am I, in all this, who am I? And I feel like if you make that change to like so frequently like you did, it could really like just kind of confuse you for some time, because you're like, hey, what's going on here and who am I, right? So I think that stability which maybe you're found now is probably helping you, because now you feel like, hey, I know who I am.
Yes.
I'm finding that stability which is important. And I know it sounds really easy to just take your bags, start a new life in a new country, but I think the emotional part of that journey is something that we don't talk about as much as we should.
Totally agree. Yes, and stability is important as well.
So I think the one question, I mean, we spoke a lot about some of your personal journey as you moved across countries. We do have a question around fintech specifically. So and your experience in fintech. You did mention you worked with big companies, and you also worked with a startup, and you went through some of the motions of working in a smaller company. What did you enjoy about working in each type of company, and how did that shape you as an individual?
Hmm. I guess like the first half of my career, when I worked in the big banks, then or corporates, that's where I learned quote unquote how to work. So it's like the structure. That's where I learned how the financial services industry works, the governance, the yeah, how a bank works, how to work within corporate, and that shaped me in the sense that I guess many people ask me all the time, what has been your experience as a woman in fintech or woman in financial services? And I always say, well, in my mind, my challenge since I was a young youngster in the professional world, in my mind, I was never thinking about me being a woman. In my mind, I was always thinking, oh, I'm a foreigner. So that was the thing, different accents, or sometimes I didn't understand them, sometimes I do understand them. So there was this limiting belief in my mind that I was not from the UK, let's say. So I think because of that, I felt that just to be average, let's say, I have to go the extra mile because I had to prove myself because I was not, quote unquote, one of them. I don't know if that's true or not, but probably that's looking back, that's what I was trying to do. Because you asked me how did that shape me. So what I did, it's like I went into all these big corporates, and because I need to work harder to be normal, then I learned a lot. That's it. It's like, and I became really good at what I do just by default of trying to be normal. And probably all that was in my mind. So when I moved to the startup world, let's say, I have these very strong foundations that I learned in the very first half of my career. So that was key. I don't know if I would have done the same in the same way if I would have stayed home, for example. Because yeah, I was a woman in a male-dominated environment and a foreigner, so I felt like I had to pedal twice as much just to do that.
It's so interesting that you mentioned this, because I believe, Abhin, in the last 4 or 5 episodes, I do believe that this has actually come out as a point where where our guests have told us that, hey, I had to work. I felt like I had to work harder just to be perceived at par with my peers as an immigrant. And I really love how you put that into a positive spin, where you said that, hey, because I had to work so hard, I learned so much more in the process, and it kind of
Hmm.
accelerated my career in a way. And I really like that, because I think you're the first person I'm hearing who's actually putting that positive spin to the fact that this is a reality that immigrants may have to face in a different country.
Yes, well, I'm proudly, I had not even realized that, but across all the challenges that I've had, because whatever reason, I'm like, because of that, I've had to kind of work a little bit uh, further, faster, whatever you want, like go a little bit beyond. But because of that, I am where I am today because I had to do extra
That's
work.
That's awesome.
And it may have been just my
yeah.
mindset, but it shaped me. That's who I am now. And now it's not, oh, because I'm a foreigner, oh, because I'm a woman. No, now it's like, that's just who I
Who
am.
you are.
I'll
Yeah.
always go beyond, a woman beyond. That's why I have a podcast. I don't need to have a podcast. But it's like, I go above and beyond.
That's
That's
awesome.
actually, again, I
And
feel like you set me up for the next question really well. Speaking of podcasts, you started the fintech product podcast and the purpose driven fintech podcast, which I think was earlier called the fintech product podcast, if I'm not
Mhm.
mistaken. Uh,
Yes.
so I'd like to know, why podcasting? Like, what was that decision where you're like, where you woke up one day and said, okay, I think I want to get into this space, even though there's so many podcasts out there. It's a challenging experience. Like, what led you to start, and how was your journey been thus far?
Yeah. I guess like that was a personal evolution as such. So the podcast started as a COVID project. Boring, like we were all bored at home,
Yeah, yeah, all of us.
properly stuck at home. And then it felt like it was forever. So for me, it was like COVID. I lived on my own. So, like, at some point, you stop. You're like, oh, I've called everyone that I haven't spoken in the past 20 years. Like, you're like, who am I going to call now? So it was like, it was really hard at some point. Then kind of had gone through a mini breakup slash work was difficult because it's COVID and all that stuff. And yeah, it was not easy. So when it gets tough, I like I'm going to say this in the podcast, but anyways, when it gets tough, I like putting quotes, quotes in the bathroom, and you're like, ah, yeah, I just see the quotes. And then one day I was crying, and then I was kind of like crying, and I look up and I saw one of the quotes, and I said, enough is enough. That's it. Enough is enough. Like, stop these, like, snap out of this not good energy that it was a combination of everything. And I asked myself, like, I told myself, I have to reinvent myself. I need to go back to what is it that I liked. And I was like, yeah, what did you like? And then I was like, oh, yeah, I used to love coaching. I used to do tons of coaching prior to the startup world. I was like, yeah, and I don't do any of that. I'm just like working a ton and that's it. And the other thing, it's like maybe 2 years before leaving the UK or so, I did tell my boss at the time, I was like, hey, Nick, I would love to start a talk show. Don't ask me why. I'm like, I would love to start a talk show. And he came from the media industry. So I was like, what do I have to do? He was like, oh, you need an audience or you need a topic. Like he gave me all these three things. And I didn't have any of those. I was like, oh, I don't have an audience. I don't have like the network, this, the other. But then when I was asking myself, what did I like to do? I was like, oh, I had this dream of having a talk show. And I was like, and things have changed between that time and now. And now with COVID, everything is kind of becoming very digital, super fast. I was like, why don't you start? And that's it. And that's the beginning of the podcast. And the beginning of the podcast actually was not about fintech, it was about personal development, women, and entrepreneurship. It
Hmm.
started in Spanish. I did 2 episodes and I stopped. And then I was like, oh, no, I don't like this. Then 3 months later, so I picked it up again. And then little by little, I was super inconsistent for about 2 years. And then little by little, I got hooked into learning the podcasting art as such, to learning social media, into the, I don't know if it happens to you guys, but like when I come in the podcasting in front of the microphone, it's like another Monica kind of comes up. It brings out these different type of passion that you might not show at work, for example. So it kind of like brought that energy out of me. So over time, I was like, oh, I like this. And then people were like, oh, you're good at it. I was like, oh my, it's not a good podcast. And eventually I got feedback that it's like, hey, have you ever thought about like merging like podcasting, that your thing, and work as in fintech? I'm like, no, no, no way, no way, no way, no way. And then I got like 3 to 4 people telling me the same story, just to make the story short. And eventually I was like, why not? So basically, what I did is like one day I just changed the name of the previous podcast. And I was like, well, I work in fintech, work in product, doing a podcast. Let's call it Fintech Product Podcast. I had a few interviews in that style topic. And then I was like, oh, I could do this. And eventually I made the decision to close the podcast, because that was I work in product. So I was like, oh, that was like my version one of my product, my baby, podcast baby. Closed it down. And then I was like, okay, now let's relaunch and think properly, because initially I did not use the product brain to build a podcast. It was just a hobby. And then I was like, okay, cool. Now let's think about what's the purpose of the podcast. How could I do it? Let's improve the processes, have consistency, this, the other. That's it. And then I launched Purpose Driven FinTech, which
Oh,
has been really cool. And it's been well received by the FinTech community.
Which is it's great to hear, especially like given even my first podcast, which I began like you was in the pandemic. In the pandemic, I bought two things. I bought an egg beater,
Mhm.
like an electric egg beater, because I was really getting into baking, and I bought and I bought a mic, a podcast mic. So I've lost the egg beater since. I don't know where it is. Uh, don't tell anyone
But the
about it.
mic is
But
still
the
here.
mic is the mic is still here. And initially,
Cool.
it was just more of a way to get. I began because see, I apart from work, I worked in marketing. Worked marketing all my life. It's not like it's been a long career. It's just been under 8 years. But I did have a passion for film and media, so I kind of wanted an avenue for where I could put content out consistently. And my whole thing was, I'm going to make this for myself. I'm going to try and keep a format for it, and hopefully we have an audience. And it slowly began to attract an audience. And more than anything else, I began to learn about the art of podcasting. And once you get bit by that bug,
Mhm.
you would just start to like explore, like you find different ways of trying to see, okay, how can I make my podcast better? Or the iPhone has a continuity camera that I can now use for video. How can I incorporate video into the podcast? So when Vivek and I began this podcast, the idea was purely audio, and I think 3 episodes, and I said, Vivek, don't worry about it, we'll pivot to video. And he was like, are you sure? But I said, don't, no, we've got to go like find the YouTube audience, because this format would really work for, let's say, a YouTube audience. So I looked at ways how I could edit the podcast, how I could incorporate AI into it, and it just became this beast. So and the idea was to slowly grow it and build an audience, and then release short form content across social, which kind of prick, like much like you, like how you brought the fintech side of you into it. I brought the marketing side of me into it. I'm like, okay, how can I grow this? I've grown communities in the past. How can we look to grow this community? So it was it one thing led to another, and just and here we are.
Yes, I see it as creative expression. It's an outlet for creative expression and growth.
I
Mm,
got dropped off for a second, so I lost the train of thought. But I'm just gonna take up the next question. Um,
mm,
so, one of the things you spoke about was passion, right? So you said you're extremely passionate about fintech, and you were passionate about something you felt you were passionate about was coaching, and then you got into podcasting. And all of these were driven by passion. So I guess the question is, how did you find that you were passionate about fintech? How did you find that you were passionate about some of the things you are, and how do you suggest that the listeners and people in general find the thing that they're passionate about?
Hmm. That's a difficult question. Um, I think at the beginning I tried many things. So I would summarize it as follow the feeling or follow the energy. Follow the energy. So if you do something, you try things out and it gives you energy, you're like, oh, that is cool. I like that. So follow that. If you do something and you're like baking, you're like, you bought the thing, but you're like, it was the interest in like 2 weeks, didn't give you the energy. But the podcasting thing,
yeah.
you're like, oh yeah, it gives me energy. I want to do more. So one, it's like it's just like try many things, follow the energy. That's I guess like how it started, especially with coaching, especially with the podcast. But I think it started with follow the energy. But what made it more of a passion, it's like I saw progress. I saw that I was learning. I saw that I was growing. So for me, probably it's fueled by growth. When it comes to fintech, it was not the case. When it comes to fintech, it's a choice. At some point, I was like, I think I'm done. Like, I'm going to change industries. I can do product in another industry, this, the other. But there comes a moment where you say, where I said, either you stay and you go full on, or you change. And then you decide. So I did not become passionate about fintech because I was so passionate about fintech. Became passionate about it because one day I made a decision that I was here for the long term and I was here to stay, and therefore I was going to make the best out of it, and therefore I was going to be of service to the community. And then it's kind of it just starts again, follow the energy. It starts feeding you because then you're not just going for work, you are part of community, you are part of the industry, you feel like, oh, yeah, now given that this is something that we're growing together, I'm going to help the next generation because I don't want them to go through what I went through. I can just tell them, don't do those mistakes. So I think that one, it's two ways. One, try many things, but I do believe that at some point you make a decision. You're like, I like this and I'm going to stick with it. And that's it. That's where the fuel and the fire and the determination and the discipline keeps you going by choice, not by passion. It's not passion on its own. It's discipline, and it's a choice.
I think that's so interesting because you pointed out that there are two kinds. I mean, at least what I'm taking from this is that there are two kinds of things that happen here. The one is the thing that you naturally gravitate to, which is the Monica
Hmm.
getting into a podcast or Roger Federer getting into tennis, right? There's a natural inclination that a
Yeah.
person has, and they go into that. The second one is where we expect that most of us expect that we need to find something that not everyone is as fortunate as Monica getting into podcasting or Roger Federer getting into tennis, right? Many of us don't find that. And I think what you're saying is even if you don't find that, you can carry passion with you into whatever you do, and you can make that a passion, which is what you did with
Yes.
with fintech.
Yes. Yeah. I'll add to that. I didn't like my job. I disliked my job for a long time, whether that was at banking or at some points. I had moments when I was in fintech and I really didn't like it. So it genuinely, it's a decision
Yeah,
to like it. And because also you're like, you're good at it.
yeah,
You start you start seeing the intersection of I've got the years of experience, I've got the talent, like I'm good at it. I might not love it, but I'm good at it. And then you go like, well, what if I did? What if I did love it? You're like, okay, let's give this a try.
yeah.
And that's
And
it. And of
honestly,
course it's a journey. It's a
yeah, it's
journey.
a
It's
journey.
not over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you do anything with passion for some time, it's inevitable that you will become good at it, right? So the main thing is doing it, staying the course and doing it with passion. Then you will become good at it, no matter what it is.
Agree. It might take you time.
Yeah.
I'm still the newbie podcaster.
So am
Yeah,
I. Abhin is not, but
It's
so
a,
am I.
I'm a newbie. I'm a newbie.
oh no, please, please. I am very new. I mean, this is still. I'm still learning, and I don't think that'll ever stop. Uh, Speaking of things that
Exactly.
of getting good, yeah. Speaking of being extremely good at things, you were one of the founding members of the team at BigPay, which is now one of the largest neobanks in Southeast Asia. So, I mean, I'd love to know the story behind how the launch of it went, how difficult it was, how what challenges you faced, not just as a person working in the company, but also as an immigrant launching this new concept, because neobanks are a fairly new concept in a new country. Like, how was that for you?
I guess like by now we are almost a 6-year-old company. So we've had any startup will have ups and downs. Whomever doesn't say that, it's lying. It is just hard because like you are starting something. That's it. It's like you're building something with limited resources, with a lot of pressure, constraints on time. So it's high intensity. But then it was not the first time that I was building a bank from scratch. So that's good context because I had already seen in the UK. Well, I have not seen, like I was part of the team in the UK building a bank from scratch. So I kind of knew the concepts of how to do it. Of course, you don't come and just replicate, but at least you know you kind of have a map. So that helped a lot, as in having a map in my mind. And what helped me a lot was I would ask myself, what could my ex boss do? What would my other ex boss do? So I say like I channeled my ex boss's wisdom. And that's how I did my first 6 months. That it was like, what could they do? Oh, they could do this. Okay, cool. And that's how I kind of like went about it. And it was challenging because fintech at the time was quite of a new thing. It was a new industry across the world. But when I moved to Malaysia, it was just the very, very, very beginning of the industry. There were two or three other players launching at the same time, which were part of big conglomerates. So the the our customers were not used to putting my money in a new bank. What do you mean? Like, why would I give you my money if you're a new player in the industry? So it was difficult from that perspective and difficult building the thing ground up. For me personally, it was very difficult because not only we were building a startup from scratch with all the complications that it has, but I was in a country that's very different to Mexico and the UK, in where I didn't have a support network. So the personal journey, that's why I said I cried for 3 months. The personal journey was very difficult. But at the same time, like because it was a new region, I was like, oh, and I get to travel and I get to travel. And I was motivated by the carrot in front of me that I was like, oh, which country are you going to go next? And I just like kept myself going because of travel. And then that's it. Here we are. I passed the test. Yeah, and there's just one thing to add. There was one day that I didn't have friends right at the beginning. Not even at work. Like I came as a boss, so people don't become friends with the boss. The boss
Yeah.
goes and has lunch on her own. That's it. A foreigner boss woman. Like I was on my own, right? And I was having lunch on my own one day, and I remember I read an article, blog post or something from an Olympic skate dancer. And basically, she tells her story. And probably that's also inspired me to kind of like share it because she tells her story about one day she goes to her mom and she says, Mom, I want to quit. That's it. This is not for me. I'm done. Da, 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 da. And her mom tells her, I'm going to support you whatever you want. You just need to promise me one thing. You have to wait until you have one good day. You stay, you continue, continue, continue. You don't quit. The day that you have a good day, you make the decision. And then if you have a good day and you want to quit, then you quit. And that kind of hit me. And I was like, man, this is hard. But then, and it was kind of an ongoing thing. And I would tell myself, you wait until you have a good day and then you quit. You wait until you have a good day and then you quit. And of course, I didn't.
I think that's a deeply philosophical concept, right? Because I think the one thing I've heard in the recent past is if you have a problem and you try to run away from it, invariably the universe is gonna throw that problem at your face in the next thing that you do, and unless you face it, overcome
I
it,
see.
and conquer it, it's not gonna go away. And I think if you're able to find that happiness, which means you're able to overcome that problem that you're having in whatever you're doing, and I think that's deeply philosophical. That's truly amazing. What you just said.
Thank you. I borrowed it from someone else, but that touched me.
So
Still sound advice.
yeah, it's great advice. So
That's good
I
advice.
know Abin wants to ask stay and ask another question on fintech, but I want to ask one question. It's slightly pivoting. We spoke about you being an immigrant, moving across different countries. We spoke about your work. We spoke about your personal passion. The one thing we haven't touched upon is visa, right? And I think
Mm,
that's a very deeply. I mean, you can't say immigration without saying visa, right? So. Um, as you move through these countries, talk us through how did you overcome some of the constraints and challenges of being on different visas, and how did that impact you personally?
yeah. Well, the reality is for most of us, you need a visa to work legally in another country. So you need to find a way. So my journey started with I'm moving to the UK to study my master's, right? So you need a student visa. When I got to the UK, it was maybe end August. By end September, beginning of October, I didn't know in my country they didn't have this, but all the big banks and consulting firms and everything, beginning of October, they go to campus and they start recruiting for the graduate programs for next year. And I was like, what? And it's like, oh yeah, you can secure work now for next year. And if you secure that, then they give you a visa. I was like, oh, wait a second. But remember, we were in 2008. So all this is like, no one is hiring. But back then, it's like, you do need to be proactive. You need to do your research. Back then, I kind of like, we were many international students. So few of us were like, I want to stay, whatever it takes. We want to stay, we want to stay, we want to stay. And then we discovered there was a very specific visa type that you could swap from student to a work permit. So 90% of the people stayed because they got a job and then they were sponsored. I stayed because I did my research and then I hired a lawyer. I did not risk it, as in, I invested in myself. I did
Yeah.
not risk filling in an application the wrong way because you're out. That's what everybody told us. So I had a good friend from Pakistan, and we were both kind of like obsessed. We're like, we're going to get this. And then, but it's true. It's like the friend helps a lot. Having the friend going through the same thing as you helps a lot because it it helps you stay in the path, and it also helps you share knowledge and questions and this and the other. So between this guy and I, then we figured out, okay, cool. There's this application form that if you come from certain university, you can extend and get a work permit. And that's it. That's what he did. That's what I did. I sponsored myself. And then every 2 years, I had to pay the visa fees. I had to pay the lawyer's fees because I was determined. And I had to ensure that I looked after my job. Because if I lost my job, then I would not have the minimum income to meet the requirements to get the visa. So that visa was like gold for me because it was like because of that I was staying there. So I was never sponsored. I always had my own visa. That's probably one of my biggest achievements. It's not the work thing. It's especially those first 10 years. It was the I sponsored myself. No one sponsored me. I saved. I did the research. I did the due diligence. I lived my life in such a way that I could secure that visa. And then it's like when I moved to Malaysia, yes, I am sponsored. And I'm very, very grateful for that. But at the same time, in the back of my head, I know, you always know that it could just go away anytime because the government changes the rules and you're like, oh. So what the impact that it has, it makes you appreciate what you currently have because you don't know when it's going to go. And you just need to be ready to move if it happens.
Yeah, it really helps because so many are like, and if you look at the US, you have the H-1Bs, and you look at the UK, the tier two visas, and so much of it is dependent on being sponsored, and you always have that sword hanging above your head in case there are mass layoffs, like say this year and the last year, where suddenly you have to pivot. But in a scenario like yours, where you have control of your narrative, yes, you've got your job as backup, but you're not sponsored, so that financial hit, the company, like the company is not thinking of your position from a financial perspective when it comes to the visa, and that itself is worth a good night's sleep, because you go to bed thinking,
Yeah.
okay, I have control of this narrative. I can, if things go south in any particular way, I still have more room to navigate, as opposed to, let's say, somebody else. I think the same with Vivek as well, where compared to, like, because Vivek is now on, I hope you don't mind me saying, I mean, you now have you're not on the H1B, or you're a green card holder, so
Correct.
that itself removes a big weight
Congrats.
off your shoulders. Mm.
It
It
does. It does. It
yeah.
does. It does.
No, it does. It definitely makes a difference.
Mhm.
Especially, I mean, it's circumstantial. Again, everyone has their own journeys, but yeah, I do feel very grateful that it worked out the way it did. Yeah.
Yeah.
Abin, looking at the time, do we just
Mm.
do maybe one more question? Did you want to take that?
Yeah, I think we spent we've asked her so many questions on fintech, Monica. I think we'll just try and pivot to the final question that we have. So you've obviously had a lot of experience launching new products and expanding into different markets. Are there any valuable lessons or tips that or any sort of advice you'd give to aspiring entrepreneurs in the fintech space?
When it comes to launching a fintech in a new geography, or when it comes to what?
Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, in a new geography, that would be that's kind of more accurate.
Oh, that's a very broad question. But I guess like the most important thing is you need to ensure that there is a need, that you are solving customer problems. Just today I was at work and we were doing our product thing. We were looking at research. We did a survey, and then it said that I don't remember if it was our survey. We looked at somebody else's survey. It said 70% of people don't buy this because they don't need it. 20% don't buy it because of the cost. It's too high. I was like, what? People are not price sensitive. It is just people don't need the thing. So, like with any business, not just in fintech, any business, you need to ensure that you are solving a customer problem. Why are they going to buy something from you? They need it, not because it's nice and beautiful. There's tons of competition, so you need to ensure that you're solving a real customer need and then that you do it in a really, really good way. That's the basics. No fancy,
Mhm.
fancy. It's like basics, basics, boring
So,
basics. Do that, do it well. It's not easy. That's why it's basics. It's not easy. Master the basics.
I mean, I think I really enjoyed this conversation with you, Monica. Thank you so much
Too.
once again for being a guest with us. Uh, I think this was a very it's one of the more philosophical conversations I've had. So I think in almost every question towards the last few, we were touching upon some aspect of philosophy. So that was great. um really enjoyed this conversation. I think I learned a lot personally, about your journey, about your struggles. I really appreciated how vulnerable and open you are. I think that's a sign of a great human being and a great leader, so I really appreciated that. um Thank you so much for joining us. I know I really enjoyed this conversation,
yeah,
and I hope to stay in touch. Thank you once again for responding to
Thanks.
the LinkedIn and making this happen.
Thank you. No, the pleasure was mine. Genuinely, I really enjoyed the conversation too. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you.
thank you so much. It was a really fun, engaging, informative conversation. and I've had a great time. I've taken some really great lessons from it, specifically the last point that you made about sticking to the basics and mastering it, and eventually things will sort themselves out. So that's a great lesson for all of us now, because not from a podcasting perspective, but generally for us to take into life. So that was super informative, and a really fun episode, Monica. I must say, I had a really great time talking to you.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for having me.
And yeah, that's us. That's us on another episode, Vivek. This was a really nice episode, as we've just waxed lyrical about it. So we'll see you on the next one. Until then, take care.